Back in 2007, when Brazil won the right to host the World Cup that's being staged this month, fans everywhere were excited at the prospect of a feast of football in a country with such a rich tradition in the world's favorite sport. Plus, it's a great place to have a party. For the government there, the fringe benefit was showing Brazil off to the world and reaping the PR benefits. However, as the cost of the tournament grew, so did the size of anti-World Cup protests on the streets. And the demonstrators had a bone to pick with the mainstream media and their coverage of the demos. Either the media failed to understand what was unfolding, or there was a reluctance in newsrooms to be critical of an event that the government wanted to showcase. So news outlets have been under the gun in a country where many still remember the days of military rule, which was not the Brazilian media's finest hour. The Listening Post's Gauri Sharma now on some of the new media startups that are filling the gaps in the coverage of news stories that can sometimes get in the way of a big sports story.
Aqui em São Paulo, a festa da Copa do Mundo começou para valer.
Not everyone has been celebrating the World Cup in Brazil. On day one of the tournament, protesters clashed with police in Sao Paulo. Journalists were also caught up in the fighting. These were precisely the kinds of images the Brazilian government had wanted to avoid. The protests have been going on for a year now. The demonstrators, who were already out on the streets in Sao Paulo and Rio over hikes in transport fares, turned their anger at the World Cup and the $11 billion cost of hosting it.
Suddenly, sharp clattering sounds started greeting our ears, and that was them pelting the glass of our studio.
The demonstrators have also targeted the media, accusing them of a pro-World Cup, anti-protester bias.
We were surprised by the 2013 rallies. For a journalist, what this means is, wow, there's big news happening. Let's go out on the streets and start trying to understand what's happening. What are these people complaining about?
When you look at the coverage, you only see one side and not the other, and that's a big problem.
O protesto de motoristas e cobradores de ônibus atrapalha a vida de quem depende do transporte público em São Paulo. Gabriel,
what we see is only the problems caused by the protests. So we have a demonstration, they will close the streets, and then people will be stuck in traffic. Or everybody needs the metro, and then the metro will not be working. That's a problem. So not really trying to see the cause or the demands.
Many Brazilians say this is symptomatic of the real issue, the concentration of media ownership in the hands of people close to political power. 10 business groups and as many families control Brazil's mass media, including the Frias Folio family, which publishes the largest selling newspaper, Folha de São Paulo, and owns the leading web content company. And Grupo Avril is the largest magazine publisher, which owns one of the most influential weeklies, Veja. But when it comes to the Brazilian media, the real heavyweight is Globo. Established in the 1950s, Globo's empire spans TV, radio and print. Its TV channel alone draws in 91 million viewers a day, ratings North American and European broadcasters would kill for. But criticisms of Globo's journalism go back to the days of the military dictatorship in the 1960s. It took a while, but last year Globo finally published an editorial saying its support of the dictatorship was an error.
What I can tell you about this organization, about every single professional journalist that works in Brazil is, we are marked by the scar of the dictatorship. We know what it is like not to have a free press, and you only have a full-fledged democracy if you really have a free press.
We've come out of a military dictatorship, but we've been through the democratization process. Throughout all this time, Globo has taken the same side, where the power lies. So its agenda is to preserve its own structure.
With the protests, first the media very much took on the law and order discourse of saying that, the police should repress. But this is not what the public wants. The public wants, again, a balanced coverage.
Filling in the gaps in the mainstream media's coverage is a new wave of media collectives. Groups like Rio na Rua, which collaborates with the protesters to get the latest on the demos, and Media Capoeira, based in the eastern state of Recife, has focused on the forced evictions angle. But the outfit with the biggest impact is Rio-based Media Ninja.
There were 1 million people out on the streets demanding change, but the media didn't reflect that. Instead, protesters were portrayed as vandals or hooligans, so people jumped online and vented their frustrations. That's where Media Ninja came in.
Armed with their smartphones and cameras, Media Ninja's citizen and professional journalists have documented the demonstrations and clashes. They started flooding the Brazilian cyberspace with images and stories like this one, suggesting that a policeman may have infiltrated a demonstration and thrown a Molotov cocktail to provoke a police response. The video was picked up by news outlets including Globo and used as evidence in a court case. With its no-cuts, no-censorship editorial approach, Media Ninja has used street smarts to develop a following online. This doesn't fit well with some mainstream journalists.
You never see ninja guys in places where they are actually in danger because of the reporting. You never see them, looking through a plethora of documents. You never see them talking to sources. There's a way you do journalism. And that's not what the ninja guys are doing.
The way these groups cover the protests have impacted the way the mass media is covering the protests. People really getting in there in front of the policemen, in front of the protesters, and trying to get first-hand image. All that was lacking from the traditional coverage.
But there has been some change. In April, President Dilma Rousseff, angered by the revelations of surveillance of her government by the NSA in the United States, passed a sweeping new internet law which guarantees net neutrality, freedom of expression online, and protects the right to privacy on the web.
There's been a lot of useful things coming from the internet, both in terms of criticism towards the mainstream media, the ways in which journalists are debating more issues of professionalism, also self-censorship and others. Before, people could simply not talk about issues of journalism, and now it's widely debated and discussed.
The more we consolidate our democracy, people are more aware that there is a lack of pluralism and diversity. And I think especially young people, they want to see new types of coverage, that people are really on the ground trying to cover, that you can see both or the several sides of things and not only one side.
Media events don't come much bigger than the World Cup. The billions spent on venues, television rights, the billions who watch the beautiful game. And long after the cup is raised, the competing narratives will still be fighting it out, in print, in cyberspace, and on the airwaves of the host nation.
We live in a country with continental dimensions and a monopolized media system. This kind of system obviously works according to the logic of capitalism and treats information as an asset. It produces information on an industrial scale so it can sell it. The truth is, though, what it's selling is misinformation.
More Global Village Voices now on the coverage of the World Cup and everything that's happening around the tournament.
Media Ninja's audience level is not the same they had last year when they arose as a phenomenon of alternative journalism. But they are still asking questions and reporting on an angle that represents a part of the population that didn't feel represented before. Brazil mainstream media is still struggling to understand what actually passed on the streets. This is the kind of story Media Ninja is telling nowadays. That's why it still matters.
Since 2013, many collectives and independent networks of media that are building a new consciousness about the real Brazil, the deep Brazil, where we can see, think and talk to these new political actors in the streets, all kind of different movements that was historically they had no voice in the Brazilian media, and now we have these new dialogues with a new reality, a new possible world for Brazilian democracy.